The email came in at 4:37 on the Tuesday afternoon while I was elbow deep in a server migration that had already eaten 3 days of my life. Subject line, family decision, from my mother. No greeting, no name, just 2 sentences. After much discussion, your father and I have decided it's best for everyone if you step back from the family entirely. Please don't contact us, and we won't contact you. I read it twice. Then I noticed the little reply all thread underneath, and there it was, my brother's response, sent 4 minutes after hers. A thumbs up. Just a thumbs up, like she'd asked who wanted pizza for dinner. I sat in my cubicle on the 11th floor of a building in downtown Columbus, and the strangest thing happened. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. I'd spent 6 years as a network security analyst, and the first thing they teach you when a breach hits is that panic is a luxury you can't afford. You don't scream, you don't cry. You isolate the threat, you assess the damage, and you start closing doors. So that's what I did. I opened a new browser tab. Let me back up, because the thumbs up doesn't make sense without the ledger, and I've been keeping that ledger in my head for a very long time. My name is Tessa Holloway. I'm 29. I grew up in a house on Marigold Lane that everyone in the neighborhood thought belonged to people doing very well for themselves. 2 stories, white columns, a lawn my father paid a service to keep emerald even in August. What the neighbors didn't know was that the house had been quietly bleeding money since I was in middle school, and that the person plugging the holes, year after year, was me. It started small. When I was 22 and had just landed my first real job, my father called and said the property taxes had come due, and there'd been a cash flow timing issue. Could I help? Just this once. I sent him $1,100. Just this once turned into the home equity line of credit I didn't know they'd maxed out. Turned into my mother's car payment when she forgot to budget for it. Turned into my brother Garrett's 2 failed business ventures. First a food truck that served exactly nobody for 4 months, then a consulting thing that consisted of him buying a nice laptop and a standing desk and never consulting anyone about anything. Over 7 years, I added it up once, late at night, because I'm the kind of person who needs to know the real number. $63,000. That's what I'd put into that family. $63,000 I'd earn debugging firewalls and pulling weekend on-call shifts and eating ramen in my studio apartment, so the numbers in my checking account would survive whatever my parents needed next. And here's the part that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. They never once said my name when they talked about how the house got saved. My mother told the women at her church that my father had made some smart moves with his retirement. My father told his golf buddies he'd tightened the belt. Garrett told everyone he was between ventures, while living rent-free in the basement of a house I was keeping afloat. I was the invisible scaffolding holding up a building everyone admired, and the moment anyone looked too closely, I was supposed to disappear. But the worst thing they ever did to me wasn't financial. It was the lie they handed me when I was 17. We were at the kitchen table. My acceptance letter to Ohio State sat between us, and I remember being so proud I could barely hold still. My father slid it back across the table toward me and said, very calmly, "We can't afford to send you, and honestly, Tessa, you're not the kind of girl who finishes things. You'd waste it." Then my mother added the part that took me years to understand was the real cruelty. Tell people you decided to take some time off to find yourself. We don't want everyone thinking we couldn't manage. You understand. So I told the lie for them. I told the neighbors I was taking a gap year. I told my high school friends I wanted to travel before settling down. The truth was, I moved into a friend's spare room, worked the overnight shift at a distribution center, and slowly, semester by semester, paid my own way through a community college and then a state school IT program. I built my entire career out of the ashes of the future they decided I didn't deserve, and I let them keep their reputation intact because I was 22 and still believed that if I was good enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, they'd eventually love me the way they loved Garrett. That's the ledger. Now back to the browser tab. The first thing I want you to understand is that I never set out to make myself essential to their lives. It happened the way a slow leak happens, one small convenience at a time, until one day you realize the whole system runs through you. Because I was the tech one in the family, I had become, over the years, the administrator of everything. I managed the family cell phone plan, 5 lines, all under my name, all paid from my account, because back when Garrett's credit was wrecked, it was just easier. I was the primary on the streaming subscriptions, the cloud storage where 2 decades of family photos lived, the home security system my mother insisted on after a break-in 2 streets over. I'd set up my father's email recovery, my mother's two-factor authentication, the password manager that held the logins to accounts they couldn't have named if you'd offered them $1,000. They'd handed me the keys to their entire digital existence, one at a time, never once thinking about what it would mean to hand that much to a person they considered disposable. So when I opened that browser tab, I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't make threats. I didn't send a single furious word back. I just started methodically the way I'd unwind a compromised system to remove myself. I logged into the family cloud account first, the one holding every birthday, every Christmas, every photo of Garrett's college graduation that I'd paid the tuition deposit for. I downloaded everything I personally cared about, which turned out to be exactly 4 photos, all of my late grandfather. Then I changed the recovery email to one of mine they'd never seen, changed the password, and enabled login alerts. The account didn't vanish. It just stopped being theirs. Then the phone plan. I didn't cancel the lines. Canceling would send a notification, and a notification would mean a phone call, and I didn't want a phone call. Instead, I scheduled the lines to convert to a new plan in 30 days. The kind of administrative change that produces no alarm and no warning. Just a quiet date on a calendar after which 4 phones would simply stop working. I removed my payment method as the default and left it blank. The security system was the one that felt almost too easy. I logged in, removed my card from the billing profile, and switched the account to paperless. No card on file meant the monthly charge would fail. A failed charge meant a 30-day grace period. After that, the cameras would keep recording to nowhere and the monitoring would silently lapse, and my parents would have a very expensive set of decorations on their walls that did absolutely nothing. I want to be honest about how I felt doing this, because I think it matters. I kept waiting for guilt. I'd been trained my whole life to feel guilt the second I put myself first. That was the program they'd installed in me, and it ran deep. But sitting there in the blue light of my monitor, deleting myself from their lives the same way they deleted me from theirs, I didn't feel guilt. I felt the way you feel when you finally take off shoes that have been a half size too small all day. I felt my own feet again. I closed my laptop, finished the server migration, and went home and slept 8 hours for the first time in, I couldn't remember how long. The peace lasted exactly until the next morning. I'm not sure what I expected. Maybe I thought the silence they demanded would actually be silence. Instead, I woke up to my phone vibrating itself toward the edge of the nightstand. 9 missed calls from my mother, 4 voicemails from my father, and a text from Garrett that just said, in the eloquent way he had, "What did you do?" I made coffee before I listened to anything. I remember that decision very clearly because it was the first time in my life I'd ever made my parents wait. I ground the beans. I let it bloom. I sat at my little kitchen table with the morning sun coming through the window, and only then did I press play on the first voicemail. It was my father, and his voice was doing the thing it did when he wanted me to feel 3 inches tall. "Tessa, I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but the security company called and said our account is suspended, and your mother can't get into the photos. And now I'm getting some nonsense about the phone plan. You fix this today. Do you hear me? You fix it today, or so help me. I will make sure everyone you've ever worked with knows exactly what kind of unstable, vindictive person you really are. I have friends. I will end you." I deleted it. I listened to the next one, which was a variation on the same theme, and deleted that too. By the 4th voicemail, my father had escalated to something that made my coffee go cold in my hand. He said that he knew people in IT, that he'd make sure I never got another security clearance, that he'd tell my employer I'd been accessing systems I shouldn't. A man who couldn't reset his own password was threatening to destroy a career he didn't understand. And the thing is, for about 90 seconds it worked. The old fear came roaring back. My chest tightened. My hands finally did the shaking they'd refused to do the day before. And then I remembered something my grandfather used to say. His name was Walter, and he was my mother's father, and he was the only person in that entire bloodline who ever looked at me like I was a whole human being instead of a resource. When I was small, he used to take me out to the workshop behind his house and let me take apart old radios just to see how they worked. He's the reason I ended up doing what I do, he used to say. Tessie, anybody can yell. Yelling is what people do when they've already lost and haven't admitted it yet. I sat up straighter. My father was yelling. That meant my father had already lost something and I just didn't know what yet. I found out an hour later. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, an area code from the small town in Pennsylvania where my grandfather lived. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm so glad I didn't. It was a woman named Marguerite, who introduced herself as my grandfather's attorney, and she told me very gently that Walter had passed away in his sleep 2 nights before. The night before the email. He'd been 91, and his heart had simply quietly stopped, and I hadn't known because the people who were supposed to tell me had spent that exact window deciding to throw me out of the family. I don't remember the next few minutes very well. I remember sliding down the cabinet until I was sitting on my kitchen floor. I remember the coffee mug somehow ending up in the sink. The grief was enormous and physical, like something sitting on my chest, because Walter was the one person whose love I'd never had to earn. He just gave it to me, freely, the whole time, and now he was gone and I'd never said goodbye. When I could speak again, Marguerite told me there would be a reading of the will. She said my parents and my brother had already been informed and had asked, quite insistently, when they could expect to receive the estate. She also said something that I didn't understand at the time, but would come to understand very well. She said, Tessa, your grandfather left some very specific instructions, and he asked me to make sure you were in the room when they were read. He was particular about that. Then she paused and added more quietly, Be ready, honey. He knew his family better than they thought. The reading was set for the following week, at Walter's house in Pennsylvania, the same house with the workshop out back. I drove out the morning of, 3.5 hours with the radio off, just thinking. And somewhere around the Ohio-Pennsylvania line, I made a decision. My family was expecting a certain version of me to walk into that room, the fragile one, the doormat. The girl who could be bullied into fixing the security system and reopening the phone plan and probably signing away whatever Walter had left, all out of guilt and the desperate need to be accepted. They wanted that girl. So, I decided to give her to them. For exactly as long as it took. I stopped at a rest area and changed out of the clean black blouse I'd worn for the funeral and into an old gray cardigan I kept in my trunk for emergencies. The kind that hangs off your shoulders and makes you look smaller than you are. I let my hair down so it hid my face. In the rest area bathroom mirror, I practiced something I'd seen 1,000 frightened patients' families do in hospital waiting rooms. The slumped shoulders, the downcast eyes, the slightly trembling lower lip. I made myself look like prey. Then I drove the rest of the way and walked into my grandfather's living room looking exactly like the person they'd thrown away. The room smelled like him, like cedar, and old paper, and the peppermints he always kept in a dish. My parents were already there, sitting on the good sofa in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My mother had on a string of pearls and an expression of practiced sorrow. My father was checking his watch. Garrett slouched in the armchair, scrolling his phone, and when he saw me, he smirked and said, "Oh good, you came. There's coffee in the kitchen if you want to make yourself useful." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, made myself smaller, and took the hard wooden chair in the corner. My mother glanced at me, took in the cardigan and the slumped shoulders, and I watched something ugly and satisfied flicker across her face. She thought she had me. Marguerite arrived precisely on time. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, and she did not perform any of the warmth my mother was clearly expecting. She sat behind Walter's old desk, opened the leather folder, and adjusted her glasses. "Thank you all for coming," she said. Walter was very specific about how he wanted this handled, so I'll read it as written. My father leaned forward. We'd just like to get this resolved. It's been a hard week. I'm sure, Marguerite said in a tone so dry it could have started a fire. She began with the assets, and I watched the temperature of the room change with every number. The house in Pennsylvania, paid off, appraised at $410,000. A brokerage account none of us had known about, built up over 50 years of a machinist's careful, unglamorous saving, worth $2.1 million. Bonds and CDs totaling another $600,000, and a separate account set up only 8 months earlier, holding $300,000 in cash, $3.4 million. From a man who drove the same pickup truck for 20 years and clipped coupons until the day he died, my mother's hand crept onto my father's knee. Garrett had stopped scrolling. They weren't grieving. They were doing math. I could see it in their faces. The calculations running, the renovations being planned, the debts being mentally erased. Marguerite cleared her throat. The entirety of the estate, she read. All real property, all financial accounts, and all personal effects is bequeathed in full to my granddaughter, Tessa Holloway. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It pressed against my eardrums. Then my father stood up so fast the sofa scraped the floor. There's been a mistake. My father wasn't in his right mind. He had dementia. We'll be contesting this immediately. Your father was evaluated by 2 physicians within the last year and found to be entirely sound, Marguerite said without looking up. He anticipated this reaction. My mother turned to me, and the mask of sorrow dissolved into something pleading and sweet and false. Tessa, honey. Sweetheart, you can't possibly manage something this size. You know you've always struggled with practical things. We're your family. Let us help you handle it. We'll set up a trust, give you a comfortable allowance, take all that stress off your shoulders. I let my chin tremble. I let my eyes fill, which wasn't hard, because Walter was dead, and I was sitting in his living room that still smelled like him. I whispered, I don't know anything about this stuff. I'm just an IT person. What if I mess it up? What if I get audited? And I watched them lean in. I watched the hunger sharpen. My father sat back down and switched, instantly, from rage to oily reassurance. Exactly. That's exactly why you need us. Listen, the simplest thing, and Marguerite can confirm this, is for your mother and me to be appointed as conservators. Just temporarily. Just until you get your feet under you. We'd handle the accounts, the taxes, all of it. You wouldn't have to lift a finger. I looked at Marguerite with wide, frightened eyes. Can we even do that? And here is where I have to tell you that my grandfather was the smartest man I have ever known, because Marguerite slid a document across the desk as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment, which of course she had. There is a provision for that, she said smoothly. If the named heir is deemed unable to manage the estate, immediate family members can petition for conservatorship. It requires that each petitioner sign an affidavit attesting to the heir's incapacity and waiving their own standing as alternate beneficiaries in exchange for the conservatorship role. It's a formality. Once signed, it takes effect immediately. My father practically grabbed the pen. He didn't read it. He never read anything. Reading was for people who weren't important enough to have others read for them. He signed his name with a flourish and slid it to my mother. She signed. They both looked at Garrett, who shrugged and scrawled his signature because going along with whatever got him paid was the only consistent thing about my brother. 3 signatures, all on the same page. And then I sat up straight. I rolled my shoulders back. I pushed my hair out of my face. I looked my father dead in the eye, and I watched the exact moment he realized the prey wasn't prey. Marguerite, I said, in my normal voice, the one I used to tell a room full of executives their network has been compromised. Would you read the next section, please? She turned the page. Per the testator's instructions, she read, any person who attempts to assume control of the heir's inheritance, whether through conservatorship, legal challenge, or any claim of the heir's incapacity, shall be deemed to have acted against the testator's express wishes. and shall thereby forfeit any and all bequests, contingent gifts, or considerations otherwise provided to them under this will or under any prior arrangement with the testator. My father's face went the color of old paper. What? What other arrangement? Marguerite turned another page. Mr. Bitt. Holloway, were you aware that Walter had been privately covering the second mortgage your son took out against your home on Marigold Lane? He was. He'd planned to forgive that debt in this will, $140,000. That forgiveness is now void. The note is part of the estate, which means it now belongs to Tessa. I watched my entire family understand all at once that they had just signed away everything and handed me the deed to their financial ruin in a single greedy gesture. My mother made a sound I'd never heard her make. Garrett went very still. You tricked us, my father said, and his voice had lost all its thunder. I stood up. The cardigan suddenly looked ridiculous on me, and I think we all knew it. No, I said, I didn't trick you. Grandpa didn't trick you. He gave you a choice, the same way he gave you a choice every Thanksgiving when he asked you to just be decent to me, and you chose wrong every single time. Nobody put that pen in your hand. You reached for it. You always reach for it. My father took a step toward me, and I watched him remember in real time that he was a 63-year-old man with a failing house, a maxed-out home equity line, a defaulted second mortgage now owned by his daughter, and a phone in his pocket that was going to stop working in 19 days. He had nothing left to threaten me with. The man who'd spent my whole life convincing me I was small had finally run out of leverage, and without leverage he was just a frightened old man in an expensive suit. Tessa, my mother tried one last time, reaching for the old magic. We're your family. I thought about Walter, who'd watched all of this from a distance for years, who'd quietly paid down debts and built accounts and sat across from these people every holiday and said nothing, because he was waiting. He'd been waiting for the day they would reveal themselves so completely that no one, not even me, could pretend anymore. He'd loved me enough to let them prove who they were, and then he'd handed me the door and the lock and the key. You sent me an email, I said. 2 sentences. You couldn't even say my name. And Garrett gave it a thumbs up. I looked at my brother, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm just honoring the family decision. You wanted me gone. I'm gone. I picked up my copy of the will from the desk, thanked Marguerite, and walked out of my grandfather's house into the cold Pennsylvania afternoon. Behind me, I could hear my father starting to shout again, yelling that thing people do when they've already lost and haven't admitted it yet. I didn't fix the phone plan. I didn't reopen the security account. The lines went dead 19 days later, exactly on schedule. The bank, eventually, took the house on Marigold Lane, the one I'd kept alive for 7 years with money nobody ever thanked me for. I let it go. Some things you save and some things you finally, mercifully, allow to fall. I kept Walter's house. I moved into it that spring, and on my first night there I found something in the workshop. An old radio, half taken apart on the bench, exactly the kind he used to let me tinker with when I was small. There was a note taped to it in his shaky handwriting. It said, "For when you're ready to put it back together." You always could, Tessie. They just told you that you couldn't. I sat on the floor of that workshop and cried for a long time, and then I picked up the radio. If you're out there waiting for the people who hurt you to suddenly become the people who love you, I need you to hear me. Stop waiting. They've shown you who they are every time you handed them the chance. You don't owe your peace to people who keep spending it. Take back the keys to your own life, and if they don't like it, let them yell. Yelling is just the sound of someone who's already lost. For a long time after that day in Pennsylvania, I kept asking myself the same question. How did 3 people who shared my blood end up with nothing? And how did a girl they called worthless end up holding the keys to everything? And the answer, when it finally came to me, wasn't complicated. People always reap exactly what they plant. My father planted contempt for 7 years, and he harvested a daughter who felt nothing when his world came apart. He reached for that pen at Walter's desk because reaching to take what wasn't his was the only reflex he'd ever practiced. Nobody tricked him. He simply met the consequence of who he'd chosen to be, over and over, every single time he had the chance to choose differently. What kept me steady through all of it came down to three things I'd built quietly while they weren't looking. The first was a refusal to become cruel, just because cruelty had been done to me. I locked them out, yes, but I never lied about them, never destroyed what wasn't mine to destroy, never sank to the level of an anonymous email that couldn't even say my name. I let the truth do the work, and the truth was enough. Holding on to your decency when someone has stripped you of everything else isn't weakness, it's the one thing they can never take. The second was learning to think clearly when my chest was on fire. I spent years training myself, in a job where panic gets people hurt, to slow down and read the system before I touched it. That's why I didn't scream back at my father. That's why I walked into that room in a gray cardigan instead of a fighting stance. Knowing when to look small and when to stand up straight saved me, and it's a skill anyone can build. You sharpen it the same way you sharpen anything, by practicing it on the small days so it's there on the day that matters. The third was the plain, stubborn endurance of putting one foot in front of the other when quitting would have been so much easier. I worked overnight shifts and paid my own way through school after being told I'd waste the chance. I plugged a leaking house for 7 years and got no thank you. That grind didn't make me better. It made me unbreakable. And when my father finally ran out of leverage, he was facing a woman he'd accidentally forged into steel. Walter saw all three of those things in me before I saw them in myself. He didn't hand me money. He handed me proof that I'd been right about my own worth the whole time. So if you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Stay good even when goodness costs you. Keep your mind clear when your heart is screaming. And keep walking, especially through the years nobody is clapping for you. Those three quiet habits will carry you to rooms where the people who doubted you can only sit and watch.